Some doors in royal palaces are meant to be opened only once in a lifetime, if ever. But when King Charles discovered a narrow, dust-coated panel hidden behind centuries-old molding in Clarence House, he felt something colder than fear. Inside that room lay secrets Camilla never intended anyone to see. Letters, recordings, and a single object wrapped in crimson cloth each, one carrying a truth sharp enough to cut through decades of loyalty. And in that moment, forgiveness didn't just fade, shattered. If stories like this pull you in the way they do for me, go ahead and tap like it. Really helps the channel grow. And if you want more deep dive royal stories, you can subscribe with one click. Feel free to share this video with someone who loves these mysteries as much as you do. Now let's step inside that hidden room together. Most royal discoveries happen in broad daylight, surrounded by advisors, historians, or security officers who know exactly what to expect. But this one? It happened in silence. In the soft, echoing hallway of Clarence House, where portraits watched every step, and the air held a faint, old-world chill. King Charles had walked this corridor thousands of times throughout his life, yet on that particular evening, something felt different. Almost as if the walls themselves wanted to speak. He paused near a tall, gilded mirror framed with the dust of generations. A draft brushed past his sleeve, too cold, too sudden, as if slipping through a crack that shouldn't exist. Curious, he ran a hand along the wooden molding. At first, nothing. Then, a tiny metallic click, the sound of something unlocking itself after years of waiting. A panel shifted. Charles pulled his hand back instinctively. Hidden doors weren't unusual in historical estates, but this one didn't appear on any blueprint he'd ever reviewed. It's not in the official registry, not in the architectural logs, it's not in the restoration notes. He leaned in, pressed gently. And the panel gave way, opening just wide enough for a sliver of darkness to spill out like breath from a sleeping beast. He hesitated. Why would there be a door here, of all places? And why would it open from the inside, not the outside? The corridor remained empty. No footsteps. No guards. No Camilla wandering the halls with a book or a cup of tea. Just Charles and a secret that had waited decades for him to find it. A narrow passage stood behind the panel. Dust spiraled from the disturbance, dancing in the quiet air. It was as though no one had stepped inside for years, yet something about the atmosphere felt lived in, heavy with emotion. Charles whispered to himself, what on earth? The question barely left his lips before curiosity, stronger, heavier, pulled him forward. He stepped inside. The space opened into a room only a few feet beyond the initial darkness. A room carved into the bones of the house, unseen by staff or visitors. The lighting was dim but not dead. A single antique lamp glowed faintly, powered not by the house electricity, but by a small generator humming softly in the corner. Someone had been maintaining it, someone very close to him. He closed the panel gently behind him. The silence tightened, and then he saw it. On a narrow wooden table lay a stack of handwritten letters, old. Some sealed, some opened, all marked with initials he recognized instantly. His, Camilla's, and someone else's. A name he had not heard aloud in many years, but had never forgotten. Charles felt the back of his throat tighten. Hi, were these letters here? He reached out, but didn't touch them. Not yet. Instead, his eyes followed the table to a velvet-lined box, positioned with too much care. Not casually placed, not forgotten, displayed.
As though the object inside mattered more than anything else in the room.
This is utterly bizarre.
He opened the box slowly. Inside was a delicate golden growth shaped like intertwined roses. An old gift he had once given Camilla long before the world accepted their love. A private symbol. Something she was supposed to have lost. She told him she had misplaced it during a charity event years ago. But here it was. Kept. Protected. Hidden. Why? His pulse quickened. Not in anger, but in that cold, sinking way a person feels when the past reaches out and grabs their wrist. Charles exhaled, steady but shaken. This wasn't storage space. This wasn't forgotten clutter. This was an archive of emotions, carefully preserved, intentionally concealed. A secret room of a secret heart. He turned toward the shelves, each line with preserved photographs, old recordings, and diaries bound in soft leather. Many were Camilla's. Private thoughts private fears, private hopes. But mixed among them were newspaper cuttings, some yellow with age, detailing controversies, scandals, and painful chapters a couple had once tried to move past. Then he saw something else. A file marked for my eyes only. But it wasn't in Camilla's handwriting. This one belonged to a royal guard. Charles recognized the name instantly, a veteran guardsman who had served through events most people only whispered about. Loyal, stern, and impossibly discreet. A man who retired years ago and vanished into quiet countryside life. What was his testimony doing in Camilla's hidden room? Charles opened the file carefully. Photocopies of reports, transcripts of conversations, times, dates, footnotes. Details that were never included in official palace documents. The guard had known something, and Camilla had kept that knowledge alive, protected, even. Charles's breath grew shallow as he flipped through page after page. Some lines were underlined, some marked with red ink, some carried notes written by Camilla herself. Not defensive or angry, but pained, almost apologetic. I should have told you sooner. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. I only kept this to protect you. The weight of the words hit him harder than he expected. He closed the folder, his hands trembling ever so slightly. The room suddenly felt too small, too tight, air pressing in on his chest like a confession waiting to be heard. He looked around again, slower this time. There were memories here, sacrifices, and secrets that refused to die. But the final object, wrapped in deep red cloth on a small pedestal, pulled him like gravity. He approached, sensing its importance, its danger. Something about the way it sat, perfectly centered, made his heart beat just a little harder. He lifted the cloth. Whatever he expected, it wasn't this. He froze. Inside was something so personal, so deeply tied to the history of their relationship and the pain surrounding it, that his reaction was not shock, but a crushing, hollow ache, one that made forgiveness, once fragile, finally break. He whispered the words almost involuntarily. "Camilla, why would you hide this?" He wasn't angry. Not yet. The first feeling was sorrow, then betrayal, then the quiet realization that the woman he loved might have carried a burden he never knew, one that could shatter the peace they had fought so hard to build. Behind him, the small generator hummed on. The letters watched in silence, and the hidden door remained closed, sealing him inside a truth he could no longer avoid. When Charles finally stepped back, he understood something he had never allowed himself to consider. This room wasn't built to protect secrets. It was built to protect him from them. But now that he had seen everything, nothing would ever be the same again. Most rooms in royal residences carry a certain predictability. High ceilings, polished floors, portraits that watch history unfold with painted eyes. But the hidden chamber Charles stepped into felt nothing like the Clarence House he knew. It felt older, untouched by restoration teams, curators, even time itself. The air tasted different, drier, almost preserved. This wasn't an accidental crawl space or an unused storage nook. This was a deliberately constructed sanctuary. And as Charles stood in its center, a single question echoed louder than his heartbeat. Why did Camilla need a room no one else could ever know about? He turned slowly, studying the walls now with more analytical eye. They weren't rough brick or forgotten timber. They were lined with dense, reinforced paneling, expertly fitted to match the house's inner structure. Whoever designed this had architectural knowledge far beyond casual hobby. More importantly, they had loyalty to Camilla deep enough to keep this work undocumented. A chilling thought formed. Did someone help her build this? A contractor? A guard? Or was it created long before their marriage, inherited like a hidden heirloom of secrecy? A small drawer beneath the table caught his attention. Unlike the polish of the room, this drawer was iron, out of place, cold to the touch. Charles pulled it open. Inside were old palace access cards, outdated security passes, and a small leather notebook containing dates, very specific dates, paired with names he recognized. High-profile individuals, former staff members, royal aides long retired. Every name was crossed out except one. The same royal guard whose file sat on the main table. Charles closed the drawer, tension gathering in his shoulders. Everything connected to that guard. Everything seemed to orbit his testimony like a star around which the secrets revolved. He turned toward the opposite wall, lined with shelves holding meticulously organized documents. Some were the faint brown of age, others looked freshly added. Receipts, personal notes, clippings of news articles detailing turbulent years between the monarchy and the press. Every headline seemed to relive an old wound, but one shelf in particular drew his eyes. It held a set of old cassette tapes. Real tapes, analog, fragile, their labels handwritten. Some were marked with simple dates, others with code-like symbols. One was labeled only with a single word, truth. Charles picked up the tape with trembling fingers. His breath caught. He recognized the handwriting. It wasn't Camilla's. It belonged to the guard. His mind raced. Why would a guard leave recordings? Why would Camilla preserve them in secret instead of handing them over to palace archives? A mixture of dread and duty pushed him to the corner, where an old tape player rested atop a low cabinet. He inserted the tape. A soft click, the faint hum of magnetic reels turning. Static, then a voice, steady, older, worn with regret. If you're hearing this, then the truth has finally come looking for you. Charles felt his stomach twist. The guard continued speaking, his tone calm yet burdened. He described events that had never reached the press, conversations that never made it into official documentation, critical moments where decisions were made behind locked doors, sometimes to protect the crown, sometimes to protect individuals, sometimes to prevent certain truths from tearing the family apart. Then came the line that froze Charles in place. I did what I did to protect Her Royal Highness. But if His Majesty ever discovers this room, then it means she never found the strength to tell him herself. Charles pressed pause, unable to continue. The guard had known about the room. He had helped build it. He had left messages for Camilla, messages she never destroyed, messages she clearly feared Charles would find someday. He resumed the tape. The guard's voice deepened. The final item, the one wrapped in red, it wasn't meant to hurt you. It was meant to shield you from the consequences of the past. But love creates strange loyalties, and sometimes unbearable silence. Charles stopped the tape abruptly. He wasn't ready for more, not yet. His eyes drifted to the pedestal where that crimson-wrapped object had sat just moments earlier. The memory of what he'd seen inside hit him again, sharp, personal, impossible to forget. The kind of thing that could rewrite years of trust in seconds. He felt something shift behind him. He turned. In the far right corner of the room stood a coat rack, simple, wooden, and completely unremarkable except for one detail. A full Royal Guard uniform hung neatly upon it, polished buttons, a sharply pressed jacket, gloves tucked perfectly into the belt. The uniform looked as though its owner had stepped out only moments before, promising to return. But that guard had retired years ago, and according to palace whispers, passed away quietly in his sleep. So why was his uniform here? Perfectly preserved, cared for, honored? Charles approached it with reverence. Pinned to the left breast pocket was a small note. For the day he finally knows everything. Charles closed his eyes. This wasn't a betrayal room. This was a burden room. A place where Camilla kept everything she didn't know how to voice. Where she preserved memories of someone who had protected her during the darkest years of her life. Someone she trusted enough to keep the hardest truths away from public sight. And from Charles. He understood, with a heaviness he could barely carry, that some secrets weren't built on deceit. Some were built on fear. Fear of breaking what little piece they managed to find together. The emotional weight almost forced him to sit. But he stayed standing, forcing himself to continue examining the space, refusing to let emotion cloud the facts. He noticed a final detail, subtle but chilling. A camera. A small, old CCTV-style camera mounted above the corner shelf, connected not to the palace system, but to its own separate wiring, its own power supply, its own memory storage. It wasn't active now, but it had been, and beneath it, on a small desk, sat an old monitor and a folder titled, Recordings Not for Royal Archive. Charles didn't open it. Not yet. He feared what those recordings might show. He feared what they might confirm. This room, the room that shouldn't exist, was not just a repository of secret memories. It was a living echo of years Camilla never wanted revisited, a shrine to pain and protection, a vault built from love twisted by circumstance. And now it was a storm waiting to break. Charles stepped backward, staring at everything. Every letter, every tape, every carefully preserved artifact. And he understood something crystal clear. The truth hidden in this room could change the royal family forever. And forgiving Camilla for keeping it might no longer be possible. For most of his life, King Charles had known royal guards as figures of discipline. Silent, loyal, carved from duty like statues given breath. But the man at the center of this secret room, the one whose handwriting filled those tapes and documents, was different. He wasn't just a guard. He was a witness, a keeper of truths that had never passed through official channels. And as Charles stood alone among the relics of the past, he realized that this guard hadn't simply served. He had intervened. And now, even in death, he was still speaking. The guard's name, Arthur Hale, echoed in Charles's mind like a bell struck in an empty cathedral. Arthur was a legend among the older ranks, a man who once stood at the palace gates with a back straight as iron and eyes that saw more than anyone realized, a man who had been close to Camilla during the years when the world was an unforgiving place for her, a man who had disappeared into retirement with no memoirs, no interviews, no confessions. Until now, Charles moved to the table and picked up a second tape, the one marked only with a date from decades earlier. He pressed play. Static, a soft breath. Then Arthur's voice, younger, steadier. This recording is for Her Royal Highness, should she ever need it, and for His Majesty, if fate ever leads him here. Charles's fingers tightened around the tape player. The truth is not kind, Arthur continued, but it is owed. The guard voice unfolded like a story forged from smoke and steel. He described the years when Camilla faced relentless pressure, public scrutiny so vicious it bordered on cruelty, times when the palace's internal conflicts escalated in ways outsiders couldn't imagine. There were moments when Camilla was harassed, followed, misrepresented, and isolated. Events Charles had known only in fragments, softened by time and memory. But Arthur had seen everything from a different vantage point. The shadows, the whispers, the threats that never reached official reports. He protected her not because it was his duty, but because he saw the toll it took on her spirit. Then came the revelation that made Charles's breath catch. Arthur spoke of a night, one never documented, when a situation spiraled beyond control. A confrontation between Camilla and an individual who had attempted to leak highly sensitive information. An argument that escalated into something dangerous. A moment where Arthur stepped in, preventing something catastrophic both for Camilla and for the monarchy. Arthur's words carried no pride, only a tired honesty. She blamed herself. She believed she had failed you, and she asked me to keep everything quiet until she felt strong enough to tell you. Charles felt the world tilt slightly. He braced himself against the table. So that was the root of the secrecy. Not betrayal, not deception. Fear that the truth, twisted and incomplete, would hurt them, or worse, destroy everything they had fought to rebuild. The tape continued. I told her she should speak to you. She said she would. But years passed. Life moved on. Happiness returned. And the longer she waited, the harder it became. Charles swallowed. That explained the diaries, the letters, the clippings. They weren't trophies or hidden sins. They were shadows she couldn't face, memories she couldn't rewrite. But Arthur wasn't finished. His voice sharpened. Then came the object in the red cloth. The final piece. I told her to destroy it. She couldn't. She said it was the last remnant of a moment she prayed would never touch your heart. Charles felt that ache again, deep, complex, impossible to ignore. The object wasn't dangerous in the traditional sense, but it carried emotional weight heavy enough to crush trust. He stopped the tape, unable to continue for a moment. His gaze drifted to a framed photograph on the shelf. Arthur and Camilla, younger, unguarded, captured in a rare, candid moment at a small charity event decades ago. Arthur stood slightly behind her, protected without trying to be, his posture instinctive. Camilla's smile in the photo wasn't one of glamour or performance. It was small, tired, and real, Charles touched the frame gently. It hurt. It also explained everything. He resumed the tape. Arthur's tone softened. If you've come this far, Your Majesty, then you already know the truth was never about betraying you. It was about protecting you from a past that neither of you asked for. He paused and added, if she never told you, forgive her. If you cannot forgive her, understand her. Charles felt his eyes sting. An unfamiliar break in composure he rarely allowed himself. This wasn't the cold, calculated secrecy he had feared. This was a wounded woman leaning on the only person she trusted during the years when she was drowning. Arthur's final words were almost a whisper. I only kept silent because she begged me to. My loyalty was to the crown, but my compassion belonged to her. The tape clicked off. Silence wrapped the room. Not an empty, hollow silence, but one thick with history, pain, and the weight of human vulnerability. All the questions Charles carried when he walked into this hidden place were shifting into a different shape. They were no longer accusations. They were understandings. Uncomfortable ones. Painful ones. Necessary ones. He sat on the small chair beside the table, something he hadn't done since entering the room. His hands trembled slightly, the kind of tremble born from emotional impact rather than shock. The truth Arthur revealed didn't exonerate everything. It didn't erase the secrecy. It didn't make the hurt vanish. But it made forgiveness complicated in a new way, more tangled, more human. Charles whispered into the quiet. Arthur, you should have told me yourself. But he already knew why Arthur hadn't. Loyalty is a strange thing. Sometimes it binds you to duty. Sometimes it binds you to the people who need you the most. Charles looked around the room again, this time with clearer eyes. The letters, the memories, the preserved uniform, the recordings, the red-wrapped object that changed everything. This wasn't the room of betrayal. This was the room of a woman trying to carry a past alone, and a guard who helped her carry it when she couldn't. Charles exhaled slowly, the decision forming before he was ready to face it. He would have to confront Camilla. He would have to ask questions neither of them ever wanted to revisit. And whatever happened next, the walls of this room would echo through that conversation like ghosts finally set free. Charles didn't rush out of the secret room. He stood for several long minutes, as if the walls themselves were urging him to breathe, to absorb, to steady himself before facing what waited beyond the panel door. The air felt heavier now, almost thick with the weight of everything he hadn't known. Everything Camilla had carried alone. He finally pressed the release panel. The hidden door slid open with a soft sigh, like the room was letting him go. The corridor outside was warm compared to the chilled air inside. Familiar, safe, predictable. The kind of corridor a king could walk through with a calm heart, confident that he understood the rhythm of his home. But now, he understood nothing. His footsteps echoed not with authority, but uncertainty. He passed portraits of ancestors, men and women who had survived wars, upheavals, betrayals, revolutions. They watched him now with their painted calm, as though reminding him that every monarch faces a moment when truth becomes heavier than any crown. And this was his. He found Camilla in the sitting room, reading a book near the fireplace, completely unaware of the storm about to break over their quiet evening. She looked up when she heard him enter. Darling, you look pale. Is everything all right? The tenderness in her voice cut deeper than any accusation could. Charles swallowed hard. Camilla, we need to talk. Her expression changed immediately. She closed her book slowly, placing a ribbon between the pages. Her hands trembled, not visibly, but with the subtle tension Charles had learned to recognize over a lifetime. What happened? She asked softly. He sat across from her, leaning forward as if the distance between them suddenly felt too wide. I found a room, he said, a hidden room, behind the mirror in the east corridor. Camilla froze. For a heartbeat, her entire face emptied, as though she'd been struck. Her fingers curled around the armrest. Her eyes lowered not in guilt, but in fear. You weren't supposed to find it, she whispered. Charles didn't raise his voice. He didn't let anger spill out, because the tapes, the notes, the uniform, the memories, they had rewritten everything he expected to feel. Camilla, why? Why hide all of that from me? Why keep those records? Those letters? Those tapes? Why keep Arthur's testimony? Why keep that object wrapped in red? Her breath hitched. Charles, please, she murmured, voice shaking. I never wanted you to see that. Then why keep it? He asked softly. Why keep something that hurt you? Hurt us? Why build a room around it, Camilla? Her eyes filled with tears, not dramatic, not loud, just quiet sorrow that clearly lived inside her for years. Because I didn't know how to let it go, she whispered. Because I didn't know how to tell you. And the longer I waited, the more impossible it became. She stood slowly, walking to the window. Her silhouette trembled against the fading daylight. Arthur protected me when I was falling apart, she said, voice barely above a whisper. He saved me from things the public will never know. He stood beside me when I was drowning in hatred and scrutiny. I survived those years because of him and because of you, but I couldn't tell you everything without reopening wounds that nearly destroyed both of us. Charles listened silently, his chest aching with a mixture of empathy and hurt. I kept that room, she continued, not because I wanted to hide from you, but because it was the only place where I could breathe without feeling judged by the world, without feeling like I had to be perfect. She turned back toward him, tears falling freely now. That red-wrapped item, it wasn't proof of betrayal. It was a reminder of the mistake I feared would ruin you. Arthur told me to burn it. I couldn't, because part of me wondered if someday, if you ever doubted me, that truth might help you understand what I was fighting to protect. Charles closed his eyes briefly. It hurt. God, it hurt. But it wasn't the sharp pain of deception. It was the dull, heavy ache of a woman who had been hurt long before healing ever began. He rose and crossed the room slowly, placing a gentle hand on her arm. Camilla, he said softly, you should have trusted me. She broke into quiet sobs. I know. I just didn't want to lose the peace we finally found. I didn't know if you were ready to see everything. I didn't even know if I was. Charles pulled her into his arms, not tightly, not authoritatively, but with the quiet tenderness of a man who knew that the world they built rested on fragile ground. For several seconds, neither spoke. The fire crackled, the room breathed, and the silence felt more human than any words could. Finally, Charles stepped back and cupped her cheek. Camilla, I'm hurt, he admitted, but I'm not leaving. I'm not turning away. I just need to understand. She nodded, tears still falling. I'll tell you everything, she whispered. No secrets. Not anymore. Good, he said, because we faced this together, not apart. She managed a small, broken smile. Together, she echoed. But as Charles looked into her eyes, he realized something unexpected. Forgiveness wasn't the issue. Understanding wasn't the issue. The real test was whether the truth, now uncovered, would let them move forward at all. Because secrets can be buried. They can be locked behind panels, hidden in dark rooms, preserved in carefully guarded tapes. But once revealed, they don't vanish. They reshape, they linger, and they demand to be reckoned with. Charles drew a deep, steady breath. Tomorrow, he said gently, we'll go through that room together, every letter, every tape, every memory. And when we finish, we'll decide what to keep and what to burn. Camilla nodded slowly. It was time to close the door on the past, not by hiding it, but by finally facing it. The flames in the fireplace flickered, lighting their faces with soft gold. Together, they walked back to their chairs, hands clasped. The night outside deepened, carrying away years of silence. The truth, now spoken, would either break them or unite them in ways the crown never could. But one thing was certain. The hidden room had been opened, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again.